Here are the top stories for today, January 8, 2020. The Philippine government orders mandatory evacuation in Iraq following Iran's missile attack against Iraq-based U.S. troops. The House and Senate expressed willingness to open a special session responding to escalating tensions in the Middle East. President Duterte tells Maynilad and Manila Water to accept their new water concession deals or face cancellation. And Miag-ao Town in Iloilo promotes food sufficiency by establishing communal food forests. Good day, I'm Bench Bondok. Welcome to the PNA Newsroom. We start tonight with the tensions brewing between US and Iran. Filipinos in Iraq are now advised to evacuate as tensions escalate in the Middle East, the latest being a missile strike from Iran against US troops there. Foreign affairs officials have vowed to ensure the safety of Filipinos living Iraq. William Theo has our top story.
The Philippine government has raised the crisis alert level in Iraq to 4 or mandatory evacuation. The Department of Foreign Affairs confirmed this Wednesday, a day after the Pentagon reported that Iran launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against U.S. military and coalition forces in Iraq. The tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate following the death of Qasem Soleimani, head of Iran's elite Quds military force, in a United States airstrike on January 3. Since the mandatory evacuation was raised by the Philippines, Filipinos who will be leaving Iraq will undergo the normal procedure of getting their exit papers. The Philippine Embassy in Baghdad advises Filipinos leaving Iraq to secure an exit visa from their employers or contact the embassy if they were victims of human trafficking. Embassy Chargé d'Affaires Jomar Sadi assured that the Philippine government would repatriate any Filipino who may be affected or displaced by the ongoing crisis in the Middle East. Meanwhile, he advised Filipinos in the area to remain vigilant, exercise caution, and maintain situational awareness. According to official count from the embassy, there are around 1,119 documented and 450 undocumented Filipinos in Iraq. For the PNA Newsroom, I am William Theo.
Staying with the brewing Middle East conflict, President Rodrigo Duterte admitted on Tuesday that his administration is bracing for a worst-case scenario for Filipinos in the current standoff between the United States and Iran. The president said one of the government's solutions is the impending negotiations with the Iranian and Iraqi governments. Presidential Advisor on OFWs Abdullah Mamao and Environment Secretary Roy Cimatu are set to fly to the Middle East. The two will seek assurance from the Iraqi and Iranian governments of the safety and prompt repatriation of OFWs. Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo earlier said Duterte issued a friendly caution that the U.S. will get the Philippine support if Iran deliberately attacks Filipinos in the Middle East. Duterte, however, made it clear that ordering the Philippine troops to help the U.S. forces is out of the question for him. He added that he would not let the U.S. use the Philippines as a launching pad. For now, Duterte said he has already asked the Department of National Defense to study on how the OFWs would make their way out of the Arab countries. In related news, the House of Representatives is ready to hold a special session to map out contingency plans for OFWs in the Middle East amid growing tensions between Washington and Tehran. House Majority Leader Martin Romualdez made a statement after President Duterte called on Congress to prepare a standby fund that could be used for the possible evacuation of OFWs. The House leader said the House agrees with the President's pronouncement that the rising tension in the Middle East needs urgent legislative attention. Romualdez assured that Congress is working closely with the Executive Department to ensure that no Filipinos will be harmed in the ongoing conflicts. The Senate also is ready to heed President Duterte's request for Congress to convene a special session. Senate Majority Leader Juan Miguel Zubiri said if the President will request for a special session to pass a supplemental budget to help repatriate Filipinos from the Middle East, the Senate is prepared to act on his request. The Senate leader added that the chamber also supports President Duterte's plan to set up a crisis committee in case war breaks out in the Middle East. Still with the Middle East situation, the Philippines is looking at the possibility of chartering 2 cruise ships to help in the possible repatriation of OFWs in the region. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana said this option is now being looked into on the likelihood that many Filipino workers in the region might opt to go home. Another option being looked into is having these Filipinos evacuated in a peaceful area like Saudi Arabia or Oman, and they will be eventually brought home from there. For its part, the Philippine Coast Guard's offshore patrol vessel, BRP Gabriela Silang, is all set to repatriate OFWs in case hostilities erupt in the Middle East. BRP Gabriela Silang left Saint Nazaire, France, for its maiden voyage on December 30, 2019, and was initially scheduled to reach the Philippines on February 10, 2020. The PCG will also deploy 18 additional crew members to assist BRP Gabriela Silang in its mission in the Middle East. Still to come, President Duterte tells Maynilad and Manila Water to accept their new water concession deals or face cancellation. And a military official slams certain provisions in the Communist Movement's Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms. More on these stories when the PNA Newsroom continues.
The Philippine Information Agency, or PIA, is mandated by EO 100. Its expertise lies in development communication. The PIA works with the Office of the President through its mother unit, the Presidential Communications Operations Office, or PCOO. This agency also does capacity building, communication planning, communication research, creative production services, news monitoring, and issues management for the Office of the President. All agencies under the executive branch, LGUs, GOCCs, and GFIs. It is capable of reaching the grassroots level even in the farthest provinces with its 16 regional offices and 78 information centers across the country. Through the years, PIA excelled in public service, fueled with a desire to make lives better for every Filipino. As the primary information arm of the government, PIA promises to continue evolving and finding innovative ways in bringing vital information to the ground. True to its vision, this agency is committed to work aggressively for an enlightened citizenry who are able to make information decisions towards improvement of their quality of living. This is your PIA, reaching Filipinos all over the world.
In other news, Malacanang says water firms, Maynilad and Manila Water, can either accept the new water contracts favorable to the government and the public or face cancellation of their present deals. Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo said concessionaires have the option of accepting the contracts. This even without guarantee of not being prosecuted with those who conspired to craft the onerous contracts. If Maynilad and Manila Water refuse to accept the new agreements, the chief executive will order the cancellation of their present water contracts. Panelo also said Duterte will not hesitate to order the nationalization of water services in their respective areas of operation. Duterte described the current water concession agreements as disadvantageous to the government and the Filipino people. Shifting gears now, the new Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines expressed confidence that Executive Order 70 will put an end to the treacherous life cycle of the more than 5 decades of insurgency. Speaking during the AFP Change of Command ceremony on January 4, Lieutenant General Felimon Santos lauded the significant gains of the National Task Force to end local communist armed conflict. He said by ending insurgency through the multi-pronged approach, there will be no reason for the Communist Party of the Philippines and its fronts to agitate, organize, and mobilize vulnerable sectors. Santos also said good governance and the efficient delivery of basic services create resilient communities that thwart the return of communist terrorists. He said the AFP can now focus on the remaining communists who persist with armed struggle. Santos, the 53rd AFP Chief of Staff, following retired General Noel Clement, vowed to immediately neutralize groups that aim to seize political power along with terrorist groups like Abu Sayyaf. He added that vigilance, support, and cooperation of the public are needed in order to suppress and prevent any future terroristic plans. Staying with the government's anti-insurgency measures, the AFP says it will support another round of peace talks, provided some issues in the Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms are clarified. Major General Antonio Patlade Jr. of the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict expressed his concern before the end of the holiday ceasefire between the government and Communist Party of the Philippines on January 7. Patlade said a section of CASER, which calls for the confiscation and expropriation of assets of foreign interests, will have international repercussions. He said the AFP cannot defend national interest because CASER calls for the demobilization of the AFP but not the New People's Army. Parlade also called out anew the CPP-NPA-NDF for its leaning towards treachery. He said on the eve of the termination of the ceasefire, he can almost predict that the terrorist group CPP-NPA will most likely attack again, the same way they attacked hours after the declaration on December 23. On to some business headlines. The Department of Agriculture is targeting to produce 19.6 million metric tons of palay in 2020. Agriculture Secretary William Dar said the projected palay harvest for this year would be 3% more than the estimated 2019 palay output of 19 million metric tons. Dar attributed the potential increase in output to the initial benefits of the government's Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund program. He said they expected initial benefits of interventions under the 10 billion peso RCEF will be realized during the dry and main season crops starting this year. Under RCEF, 3 billion pesos is set aside each year for certified seeds up to the year 2024, where farmers will receive 40 kilograms per hectare of certified rice seed varieties for every planting season. The DA chief also noted that the adoption of modern technologies, mechanized land preparation, crop establishment, and harvesting could help farmers attain an incremental yield of another 1 million metric ton of palay per hectare. A bishop from Bataan has called for prayers for those affected by the conflicts in the Middle East as well as the bushfires in Australia. More on this and other news from the provinces from Ruth Abigita Carlos.
Bishop Ruperto Santos of the Diocese of Balanga asked for prayers amid the volatile situation in the Middle East and the raging bushfires in Australia. Santos is the chair of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines Episcopal Commission on the welfare of migrants and itinerant people. The bishop called for restraint and avoidance of war, as well as the safety of the overseas Filipino workers in the Middle East. He also shared a prayer recited by the Diocese of Balanga in solidarity with Australia. Meanwhile, 3 mountaineers who went missing in Mount Balatucan in Gingoog City, Misamis Oriental were rescued Tuesday. The Army confirmed the rescue of Rain Casiopea Fama, Dan Dave Del Rosario, and Christian Daryl Tapiru, all residents of Nasipit Town, Agusan del Norte. The mountaineers began scaling the mountain last Friday, January 3, and had gone missing for 2 days, with their last known location traced at the scout camp in Sitio Kivolig in Barangay Lunotan, Gingoog City. In other news, the Department of Health said there is no reported case of the so-called mysterious respiratory virus coming from China in Davao region. The South China Morning Post reported on January 4 that an unknown strain of pneumonia has been making people ill in Wuhan, China. The DOH said they will closely monitor the seaports and the airports to make sure that the virus cannot enter the region. It asked the public to refrain from posting on social media regarding the disease, which he said may only create panic among the public. For the PNA Newsroom, I'm Ruth Abby Gita Carlos.
More stories from the newsroom. President Duterte vows continued support for Filipino scientists. And Miagao Town in Iloilo promotes food sufficiency by establishing communal food forests. We're back after a quick break. Stay with the PNA Newsroom. President Rodrigo Duterte on Tuesday pledged to push for reforms that will help boost the capability and competency of scientists in the country. Duterte made a vow after conferring the rank and title of National Scientist on agricultural expert Dr. Emil Javier. Javier has been named as the country's national scientist through Proclamation 789 signed by Duterte. Proclamation 789 acknowledges Javier's work in the field of agriculture by spearheading the Institute of Plant Breeding that popularized high-yielding crops and disease-resistant varieties in the country and in Asia. The president also hailed Javier's promotion of sound agricultural policies and programs, utilization of climate and environment-friendly agricultural innovations, and improved governance and management systems to help improve the productivity of farmers and fisher folks. The president hoped that Javier's perseverance, curiosity, and commitment would inspire Filipinos. A look at our top global stories. The Pentagon confirmed Tuesday that Iran has launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against U.S. military and coalition forces in Iraq. In a statement, the Pentagon said these missiles were launched from Iran and targeted at least 2 Iraqi military bases hosting U.S. military and coalition personnel at Al-Assad and Erbil. The White House said earlier on Tuesday it had noticed the reports of attacks on U.S. facilities in Iraq, saying President Donald Trump is monitoring the situation closely and consulting with his national security team. The missile attack prompted Philippine foreign affairs officials to declare mandatory repatriation of Filipinos in Iraq. Owners of hotels and resorts in Cebu are reeling from a drop in bookings due to competing online booking sites offering lower prices for lodging or home stays. Alfred Reyes, Vice President of the Hotel, Resort and Restaurant Association of Cebu, Incorporated, claimed that an online site that markets condominium units for lodging or home stays has been raking in higher revenues. On the other hand, between 30 to 40% has been lost in terms of revenue on their side. Reyes said online sites or apps have been offering condominium spaces to foreign nationals despite the absence of government regulations. He suggested that local government units put in place regulatory procedures over online booked condo units. Carlo Anton Suarez, president of HRRAC, said although the annual Sinulog Festival on January 19 is approaching, hotels in Cebu could still hardly get bookings. Helena Asis Dimpas, Chief of Tourism Operations at DOT Central Visayas, said the hotel and resort players have already been informed about the agency's actions. And before we go, a town in Iloilo is taking steps to boost food sufficiency by establishing a communal food forest in each of its 119 villages. Under Miagao Town's Miagao Action on Cleanliness program, the Municipal Environment and Natural Resources Office spearheads the implementation of communal food forests, which requires each village to allot an area for fruit-bearing trees. The Menro said the program can make the town become food sufficient, at the same time help counter climate change. 23 of the town's villages have already established communal food forests. Trees that can be grown in the food forests include indigenous and high-value fruit trees like lanzones and rambutan. Locals may also opt to grow trees which will adapt to the climate in southern Iloilo like banana, guava, and mango trees. The town is also supervising a 70-hectare assisted natural regeneration area, 50 hectares of upland agriculture, and 50 hectares of agroforestry area. Here's another look at today's biggest stories. The Philippine government orders mandatory evacuation in Iraq following Iran's missile attack against Iraq-based U.S. troops. The House and Senate express willingness to open a special session responding to escalating tensions in the Middle East. President Duterte tells Maynilad and Manila Water to accept their new water concession deals or face cancellation. And Miagao Town in Iloilo promotes food sufficiency by establishing communal food forests. Thank you for watching another episode of the PNA Newsroom. To check more news content, check our webpage or head on to the Philippine News Agency's Facebook and Twitter accounts. For more stories about the government and how it serves Filipinos, look for these hashtags in all of our social media platforms and websites. We are shown on the pages of the PCOO and its attached agencies. Also watch us on television on PTV4 and IBC 13. And that's your daily dose of the biggest stories that you need to know from the PNA Newsroom. I'm Bench Bondok. Good evening.